God did not create man. God did not create the heavens or the earth.
I'm waiting for someone to convince me that we don't live in a simulation.
Creek Indians were classified as colored.
I think the government made the plague on purpose to get rid of the population growth.
Oxygen is a god. Hydrogen is a god.
Please be advised, this presentation is not an argument for or against the belief that dragons are real.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up out of your sleep, asleep.
James Mooney, a folklorist who documented the cultures of lots of Amerindian tribes in the 1800s, said the following.
The Indian is essentially religious and contemplative, and it might almost be said that every act of his life is regulated and determined by his religious belief. It matters not that some may call this superstition. The difference is only relative. The religion of today has developed from the cruder superstitions of yesterday, and Christianity itself is but an outgrowth and enlargement of the beliefs and ceremonies which have been preserved by the Indian in their more ancient form.
We have no ancestral religion. Religions control your thoughts by requiring you to believe something regardless of what you observe in real life. Our spirituality was a pseudo-science, hence the medicine man or the witch doctor. We didn't have faith in anything. Instead, we had elders who made real-life observations of the world around us, and we allowed that information to inform how we lived and sustained ourselves in practical ways. What's the first step of the scientific method? Observation. What we observed in real life was the only higher power we knew. But is there really a such thing as a higher power? That's the question the Energy Mysteries series is really meant to answer. This is episode 2, so if you missed episode 1, definitely go back and watch the video entitled American Indians Prophesied Black People Would Regain Indian Identity. It's critical to understanding the rest of the series. We're all probably familiar with the term Great Spirit. The question is whether or not there really is one. Great Spirit is what many American Indian traditions call that higher power. But it's not just higher, it's also lower. It's an inner power and an outer power simultaneously. Believe it or not, the ancient Yatzaralim, whom most people call Israelites, they had the exact same view of the Great Spirit that American Indians retained all the way up until colonization. But when you read the Bible, it's hard to notice that because Christians translated our ancestral writings into English with a Christian bias. That's deliberate. A concerted effort was made to hide the Great Spirit. And the veil that was pulled over the Great Spirit is this concept you call God. God is not the Great Spirit, but God is real. We know He's real because God is observable in mathematics.
It's all in the numbers.
I'm all in the numbers. Today's presentation is going to be rough on a lot of my Black Hebrew Israelite family. The Great Spirit has already opened your eyes to see that we're not only the ancient Yatzaralim, but also American Indians. However, we all have to learn to read our ancestral writings through the eyes of our ancestors, which means taking off the rose-colored glasses that the colonizer made us wear. But if we're talking about a higher power that's not God, what else could it be? Please keep an open mind on this. Your goal should be to learn how to read the Bible like an Indian. Pro tip: the Amerindian reading is usually very literal and much less interpretive than the religious readings. I'm gonna tell you a short Ichiti Indian folktale, but it's a true story. A specific species of finches lived on an island in an undisturbed ecosystem until a separate species of finches migrated to that island. This threw off the balance in the ecosystem because finches were seed foragers. But obviously the new finches weren't bringing new seeds with them, of course, which means that food source now has to feed double. You see, ecosystems are about balance, and migration can ruin that easily. How do you balance an economy? Population control.
I think the government made the plague on purpose to get rid of the population growth. It's all in the numbers.
All in the numbers. What happened was that these immigrant finches apparently took all the resources, but they mated with the natives and created mixed breed finches who also made it hard for natives to feed. But guess what happened? I'll bet you already know. Balance was restored when native finches changed the shape and size of their beaks to be better suited for cracking and eating seeds of a different size. This balanced the seed economy for all the finches. This is a prophetic allegory. Nature will restore balance to this otherwise dying world by edifying the indigenous peoples again. The zeal of the Great Spirit will do this by establishing the arbitrarily empire. However, that's not the point of this story. This story is actually what was observed in real life during a 2006 Texas A&M study on character displacement, and it's now a famous study. In the middle of the first paragraph, it says the following, quote, "Here we report that if Darwin's finch species on an undisturbed Galapagos island diverged in beak size from a competitor species 22 years after the competitor's arrival, when they jointly and severely depleted the food supply," end quote. Stay with me. Let's drop down and get an explanation of what character displacement is and how it relates to this. Quote, "Character displacement is an evolutionary divergence in resource exploiting traits such as jaws and beaks that is caused by interspecific competition. It has the potential to explain non-random patterns of co-occurrence and morphological differences between coexisting species." And interspecific means between two different species. So character displacement is when competition over resources between two or more species makes some of the animals physically change or adapt in a way that makes it easier to sustain themselves in future generations. The system, the ecosystem, optimized feeding and sustainability for the immigrant, the native, and the hybrid all together. The system did the optimization of that. And it did so by causing a genetic shift in the most disadvantaged of the three. This is directional natural selection. The trait chosen for one species was in the best interest of all three, not just the one. Why? Because that trait was chosen by an all-encompassing system that governs the whole island. This demonstrates that natural selection isn't just done by the animal in question. It's a choice made by something outside the animal, an overarching system that contains the animal. That right there is a higher power. Natural selection is the smoking gun that proves there's a real decision maker both inside the individual and outside the individual. Like I said, the higher power is both an inner power and an outer power. A 2002 study from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute found that, quote, "Natural selection results in ecosystems organized to maintain high productivity of organic matter and diversity of species, just as competition among individuals in Adam Smith's ideal economy favors high production of wealth and diversity of occupations," end quote. Yeah. It's not just about selecting individuals. It's about regulating the entire microenvironment of all species involved all at once. So the question is, who or what is doing the selecting if it's not internal?
It's all in the numbers.
Here's a Facebook post from Visit Cherokee, North Carolina, the official tourism bureau of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation. The post tells us how to pronounce Unehiya, and then tells us that this is, quote unquote, the Cherokee word for God or Great Spirit. Okay, so we've confirmed the name, but the problem is Unehiya doesn't actually translate to Great Spirit at all. And it most definitely doesn't mean God, because the word God doesn't actually mean anything. We'll come back to that later, but I'm going somewhere with this because in a very similar situation, the Lower Muskogee tribe, which is Powhatan band of the Creek Nation, explained their own history regarding the Indian Removal Act of 1826 as follows, quote, "The state laws which followed the Indian Removal Act of 1826 would greatly affect the Muskogee people for many generations. Muskogee people were not allowed to work or be hired by a white man. Their hunting and fishing rights were taken away. Their identity was taken away and their race was changed to persons of color. Ceremonial rites of thanking God, Hisakedemisi, for water, fire, and corn were taken away." End quote. So first of all, we should never overlook these many opportunities to point out that, of course, Creek Indians were classified as colored, though you wouldn't know it from looking at modern Creek Indians. Today, when anyone in America thinks of the term colored, they think of black people because we too were reclassified as colored, which I'm sure is just a mere coincidence.
It's all in the numbers.
Nevertheless, I'm more interested in the fact that these Muskogee themselves refer to a higher power called God, and then parenthetically call it Hisakedemisi, whom you hear me mention on this channel all the time. Here's the thing. There is no relationship of any kind between the word God and the name Hisakedemisi. However, they thank this entity for natural resources and energy, water, fire, and the fruit of the earth, also known as corn. Here's what nativelanguages.org says about Ahone. Quote, "Ahone is the great creator god of the Powhatan tribe, sometimes known as the Great Spirit or Creator in English. Like most Algonquian high deities, Ahone appears to have been an abstract, benevolent creating spirit who was not personified in folklore and probably did not have a gender. Christian missionaries arrived early to the Powhatan tribe and had a large influence on their culture, causing Ahone to become equated with the Christian god and take on the masculine English pronoun he." End quote. So in the same breath, a Native American cultural heritage organization calls Ahone both a god and a spirit from the folklore of Pocahontas' people. But they go a step further too. They include reference to the fact that Anglo-Christian influence caused the Powhatan to conflate Ahone with the deity of the Bible, whom we just call God. That explains why Ahone is called a god. And given that Trinitarian Christians describe God as having three persons, with one being the Holy Spirit, it logically tracks that spirit and God would be used interchangeably for Ahone too. What's a god? What's a god? A spirit. Okay, then what's a spirit? A god. This is why no one knows what a god is or what a spirit is. The Ichiti principle of discernment tells us 1 is an incident, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern.
It's all in the numbers.
We have 3 examples of Native Americans referring to their most revered mystery energies as gods, and one source confirms this as having been caused by colonial evangelism. The question is, what are these gods? While you've heard me say many times that I'm an Ichiti Indian, I am also Pamunkey Indian through my father's father. Our tribe held the administrative district of the Powhatan Commonwealth. We were the most important branch off of the Werowokomoko people who were the trunk of the Powhatan tree. Our Kwiokosuk, which were our witch doctors, governed the tribe and served as intercessors between man and nature. They taught that the origin of everything, from the trees to the stars, was a mysterious source called Ahone. But they also taught that Ahone had a co-creator named Oki, which confused colonists who were trying to understand our complex culture. That confusion persists to this day. For instance, if we go to Wikipedia, it says, quote, Ahone was the chief god and creator in the religion of the Native American Powhatan tribe and related Algonquians in the Virginia Tidewater area, end quote. Skip to the last sentence of that paragraph, and it just mentions as an afterthought, quote, the god Oki was his wrathful counterpart, end quote. But then let's check Encyclopedia Virginia. Quote, although the word Oki appears to have been borrowed from the Iroquoian-speaking Huron, the Algonquian-speaking Powhatans apparently used it in almost the same way, to refer to spirits in general, or more probably, a category of spirits immediately involved in Powhatan activities. According to the colonists, the Powhatans sought Oki's approval for many of their activities and frequently offered him sacrifices of tobacco, blood, deer's suet, and other items. Some accounts report that Oki was supremely ugly, leading some early colonists to associate him with the Christian devil. Oki was also said, we're skipping a little bit in the paragraph here, so check this out. Oki was also said to have introduced the Powhatan's ancestors to important cultural forms and to have created some or all of the world that they knew. Another account ascribes that creation to Ahone. Oh, you don't say. The Powhatans described Ahone to the English as a benevolent, peaceable god living in the highest reaches of the heavens, who rules all other divinities, as well as the earth. He is the source of all good things, from the change of seasons to bountiful harvest to social harmony, and because it is his nature to provide these things, he requires no sacrifices. In fact, the Powhatans appear not to have paid him much attention at all. End quote. So the first source made Ahone the most important one, yet the second source made Oki the most important, and even attributed at least some part of creation to Oki. Both sources agree that Oki is a god of wrath, but the latter said colonists equated him with the devil. Sources are inscrutable and slightly contradictory on the relationship between Ahone and Oki, but the truth is much simpler. The truth is that Ahone is yin and Oki is yang. And I'm not just saying that. The Kwiokosuk made observations in nature that were consistent with Taoism, which is where the concept of yin and yang come from. When you check the Wikipedia page for Oki, it says, quote, the dualistic European concept of a good god versus a devil does not map cleanly onto Powhatan beliefs. Oki was a powerful spirit, neither wholly benevolent nor malevolent, but a force to be respected, end quote. In a later section, it says, quote, he is not a devil, but a presence that demands respect, much like natural law, end quote. You hear me talk about the law of nature all the time. Now I'm going to explain why. This is actually an extremely unique way of life, wherein the medicine men acknowledged countless spirits in nature, but viewed the Great Spirit as an all-encompassing spirit that all the others were a part of. But the kicker is that this omni-spirit is also bifurcated into two halves. Almost no religion views all spirits as part of a whole, while splitting the whole in two. Christianity, for example, splits its God into three, but it also separates all angels, demons, and spirits into individual beings and rejects the idea of them all being one. Here's why that's ironic. 2 Samuel chapter 24 verses 1 and 2. And again the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Yatzarel, and he moved David against them to say, Go, number Yatzarel and Judah. For the king said to Joab, the captain of the host, which was with him, Go now through all the tribes of Yatzarel, from Dan even to Beersheba, and number ye the people, that I may know the number of the people. You can read the rest of this passage yourself, but basically what happens is Big Chief Loved One, better known as King David, takes a census. Why? Because
It's all in the numbers.
all in the numbers. Natural selection punishes the entire empire for taking a census, killing 70,000 people across multiple tribes with an historic plague.
I think the government made the plague on purpose to get rid of the population growth.
You might ask, why would natural selection punish them just for taking a census? What's wrong with that? In the Iron Age, it became popular for kings of all nations on the Eastern Hemisphere to prove their greatness by taking a census to show how many men they commanded. You know, because it's all in the numbers. And they would usually publish those numbers on stone monuments as a sign that the king had prospered the kingdom. No emperor was supposed to do this in the arbitrarily empire, though, because natural selection had repeatedly emphasized the fact that having an emperor was just a formality. This was the golden age of Yatzarel, and all credit for that was supposed to go to the Great Spirit, not the emperor. But then, you might say, yeah, but still, the Great Spirit made David do it in the first place, so that's not fair. Right. Yahweh was angry already because the people weren't living the way they were supposed to, so she forced David to rope the people into a widespread sin so she could punish the whole nation for it. That's why it says Yahweh moved David against the people. Against the people. But there's one other passage that tells this same story with one key difference. 1 Chronicles 21 verses 1 and 2. And Satan stood up against Yatzarel and provoked David to number Yatzarel. And David said to Joab and to the rulers of the people, Go, number Yatzarel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring the number of them to me that I may know it. Same exact story being told a second time, but this time the only difference is that it's not Yahweh who made Big Chief Loved One sin. It's Satan. So we have two options here. Either the Tanakh just contradicted itself, or both versions are true. And the only way for both versions to be true would be if Yahweh and Satan were one and the same. Yes, I'm saying the one you call the devil and the one you call the Lord are actually the same thing. I told you the higher power is also the lower power. Satan is just one of the two main parts that make up the duality of Yahweh. Let me show you the duality, because this is part of how we get rid of Trinitarian thinking. There is no Trinity, which is why the word Trinity never shows up anywhere in the Bible, Old Testament or New. Two parts, not three. It's all in the numbers. Watch this. Isaiah 45, verses 4 to 7, quote, For Jacob, my servant's sake, and Yatzarel, mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. I am Yahweh, and there is none else. There is no Elohim beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west, that there is none beside me. I am Yahweh, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. End quote. Yahweh says there are no gods beside her. Yahweh emphasizes the crap out of that point. There are no spirits outside of the Great Spirit. That's what she's saying. She emphasizes this by saying it repeatedly. She then admits that she herself creates evil, but she also creates peace. She's the source on both sides. You blame Satan, you blame Satan for evil, but it's really Yahweh. So what is Satan? What is Satan if his job's being done by Yahweh? Yahweh's the Great Spirit, and Satan is a category of spirits that make up specific parts of her, chiefly the parts that we interact with the most. Satan is Oki, which Encyclopedia Virginia said wasn't really just one spirit, but rather a category of spirits. This is why colonists said my ancestors sacrificed to Oki. Wikipedia said Oki's a god who commands respect on the earth like natural law. That's because Oki's the sum of all spirits enforcing natural law. And natural law is Torah. If you violate it, you provide a sin offering, which would go to whom? The source of your consequences, which is Satan. Satan is a proper noun derived from a verb pronounced the same way, meaning to attack or to resist. So as a name, it literally means attacker or resistor. It's commonly translated more loosely as adversary or enemy, but the literal meaning would be some kind of middle ground between attacker and resistor, which is basically oppositional force. Satan is Oki, the sum of all opposition you face in life. Notice that this last verse that we just read is built on binary opposition. Light and darkness, followed by peace and evil. That first dyadic pair is in a perfectly binary state, but the second one isn't. What I mean is, light and darkness are genuine opposites, but peace and evil aren't really opposites. They're somewhat oppositional, yet not a perfect binary. Why is that? That's because the translation here is inexact. The Hebrew word for evil doesn't actually mean evil because our ancestors didn't have a concept of evil in their ancient language. That word is Ra, which more literally means general badness that disturbs your peace. Badness that disturbs. That plague upon your ancient empire was badness that disturbed our peace. But it was also judgment against us for how we were living in the first place. Consequences are bad experiences that don't let us have peace after we've done wrong. When you spank your child for coloring on the wall when he knew better, the child is at peace with what he's done first, but you disturb that peace with a bad experience that discourages him from ever doing it again. That's what Satan is. That's Oki. Now remember, Oki is actually the Iroquois name for Satan, even though Powhatan are Algonquian, not Iroquois. Algonquian nations on the East Coast frequently encountered Iroquois nations to the northwest. But in a previous presentation, I showed you a powerful Iroquoian empire oddly positioned just south of the Powhatan, the Chichimeco Empire, which the English called the Westo. They are highly likely to be the origin of the Cherokee who seemingly emerged as a clan of the Westo. The supreme deity of the Cherokee, as we already covered, is Unehiya. We still haven't addressed what all these gods and spirits actually are yet, but that's where we're headed. Just hang on. Unehiya is often described as the Cherokee sun goddess, specifically, but more broadly as the Great Spirit. However, it's important to examine the root words most likely used to make this name. The first root word is Unehiya, which means he has liquid. This is connected to another root, which appears to be Gotlonahi. It's the past tense of a verb that means create. The transliteration of the name, therefore, would be a statement. He who has liquid created. Now, what does that mean? It means the creator is whoever has the liquid. What liquid? What liquid is associated with creation? Evolutionary theory traces all living things to what evolutionists call the primordial soup. University College London biochemist Nick Lane succinctly explains it by saying that, quote, the Earth's early atmosphere was composed of simple gases like methane and ammonia, and they would react together under the influence of ultraviolet rays. Under the influence of ultraviolet rays or lightning, to produce a thin soup, which became thicker over time, of organic molecules, end quote. So theoretically, the sun's rays caused methane and ammonia to yield a liquid with organic molecules in it, which eventually produced amino acids in the liquid. Since amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and proteins are the basis for DNA and the cellular makeup of living things, this liquid would be the beginning of life on Earth. Somehow, the ancestors of the Cherokee knew that the creator was the sun who had liquid, so they acknowledged that. It's not just a sun goddess with a weird name. This isn't Greek mythology where the whole pantheon is just a soap opera with superheroes. No, we're talking about a personification of the real sun and the assertion that it used a liquid to create life on Earth. Didn't I tell you our ancient shamanism was a pseudo-science? It's not a religion. The ancestors weren't obligated to believe anything specific, but they were guided by the understanding that life comes from liquid under the influence of the sun, which applies to everything from agriculture to medicine. The richest soil is near the water, and the sun gives the best harvest to the land. Sick people need the liquids from the plants and herbs, and their melanin needs to be charged by sunlight for the body to heal. By the way, the people whom Cherokee referred to as their own ancestors were called Unehiya, hence the name of the advocacy group whom Hiloha Naniwaya's currently leading to get Black Americans recognized as American Aborigines. Open the description box and hit the link to support Unehiya. This word suggests that the ancestors to whom they're referring are those whose generation was closer to the era of the first water, the primordial liquid. That's what it's all about. The primeval waters, the sun, the reactive forces of methane and ammonia. We're talking about the elements. Literally the elements. That's who the gods are. In episode 1, we discussed the fact that the Anishinaabe called the spirits Manitug, which literally means mystery energies, hence the title of this series. The mystery energies are what we're really talking about when we discuss gods or spirits, and chemistry calls them the elements. The elements created the world and everything in it, and they're all a part of a system that has its own consciousness and thinks for itself. That's natural selection, which extends well beyond just living organisms and their ecosystems on Earth. It's the operating system of the entire universe. How did Anishinaabe know there were mystery energies at the microscopic level, bonding forces that pull atoms together to create new forms of matter? How could the Cherokee have intuited that the sun created life by acting upon liquid? Do you know the Cherokee name for world? In Tsalagi, a world is called Elohi. Elohi. Why? Because every world, not just ours, but any world, any macro environment, any planet, is a creation of the elements, and the elements are called Elohim. Elohim created everything, including humanity. And when Elohim created humans, they didn't come to life until they were filled with the sacred wind. That's who the Ichiti acknowledge as the Great Spirit, Hisageremesi. The name Hisageremesi is interpreted two ways: Lord of Wind or Master of Breath. In the age of sacred trees, which is the first age of mankind, we read the following. Genesis 2, verse 7. And Yahweh Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's that wow that you hear about from 432 The Drop, Kurimeo Ahau, Dragon Canoe. Wow. That's what animated humanity. That word breath in ruach, that's ruach in Hebrew. Ruach simultaneously means both breath and wind, just like Hisakedemesi is the Lord of Wind or the Master of Breath. It's both. The wind of the earth is common to all things, but the breath you recycle from it over and over is your sacred breath. Sacred means set apart. A special part of the wind was set apart to sustain you. Guess what? Ruach also means what? Spirit. Yeah, the breath that animates you is your spirit. Tell me the Hebrew tradition isn't animistic shamanism. This breath is in all things. The trees breathe and give it back to us. The birds breathe. The oxygen of our wind is also in the water that the fish breathes. Even stones breathe, trapping air inside their pores. The entire earth breathes, and the breath of Earth Mother manifests as the skies above. This is the sacred wind that animates. That's why we say that everything has a spirit. They call Amerindian traditions animistic and look down upon us, but our ancestors spoke the truth. Science only vindicates them. Wow. Guys, what we're about to talk about is a game changer. In short, Unehiya is a small team of highly capable individuals trying to lobby Congress for federal recognition of Black Americans as pre-Columbian American Indians. I'm one of them. I'm the public information officer, so I'm out front recruiting and providing information. I'm also handling PR because of my background in print journalism. Right now, we're focused on a well-planned lobbying campaign to get the Negro recognized as the American Indian, and our campaign strategy hinges on exploiting a quasi-legal precedent in an amendment proposal for a dormant Senate resolution that already exists. I want to appeal to everyone watching this video to support the campaign by joining Unehiya. And guess what? You don't even have to know a single thing about politics or history. Just help us build our list of demands and help each other use Unehiya's genealogy tools to identify your ancestral tribes. Vote yes or no on the hundreds of decisions we have to make. Participate in our tribal town hall meetings after every new moon. Look, I'm not asking for super chats or any other donations to my own pocket. If you've got any spare change, use it to become a stakeholder in Unehiya, which can be done for as little as $7. You can opt into stakeholder leadership for about $20 if you've got the budget for it, which gives you greater voting power on the decisions we make as a tribe. Believe it or not, it only takes 5 minutes to help us reclassify ourselves as Indians. Let's go! I told you already that Satan is a category of spirits that make up the great spirit known as Yahweh. The other category is Elohim. There's only one other category, and it's Elohim. Together, these two make up the duality of Ahone, Kichimanito, Yahweh. Whatever Elohim does is an act of Yahweh, but whatever Satan does is also an act of Yahweh. So technically, when I contrasted Yahweh and Satan as yin and yang, that was like ascribing dichotomy to peace and evil. It's not quite right. The real dyadic pair there was peace and disturbance, whereas the real binary here is Elohim and Satan. So what is Yahweh and what is Elohim? In the previous episode, we broke down what Yahweh is. Yahweh is the very concept of existence. Anything that exists is part of her. We even covered the fact that the modern Hebrew word for existence appears to be a derivative of the word Yahweh, but all things exist as either matter or energy. And whether it's matter or energy, what we're really talking about is the elements. The mystery energies to which Anishinaabe referred are the elements of the universe and the forces of nature that hold them together and split them apart. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, Elohim created the skies and the land. That first verse is a preview of what the rest of the passage is going to describe. But then it backs up in verse 3 to include the creation of the entire universe. All credit for creation is going to Elohim. Let's review what Elohim is. It's the plural of Eloah, which is a composite of a noun and a gerund, El and Chai, respectively. El means power or force. Chai means being or living. Put together, Eloha means living force, which is more commonly called life force in English, or power of being, you could say. You could also say energy of existence. But just remember, we started with Elohim, not Eloah, so it needs to be plural because that's not just one. It's life forces, or powers of being, or energies of existence. These are your mystery energies, like Unehiya and Hisakiremesi. As the series progresses, we'll actually identify them in more detail because all these names are just words. They don't actually tell you who or what the energy is. But every time you see the word God in the Tanakh, that's a substitute. God is not Elohim by himself, but we'll discuss who he is in a minute. The point is, he's one of the most influential forces of nature, yet even he's still just one force. Germans led everyone to copy and paste his name over all the identities of Elohim. But Elohim is actually a pantheon, not a single deity. You shouldn't be surprised to learn that either, since Elohim is plural. I know some of you believe that the plurality is about Yahweh, Yeshua, and the Holy Ghost. We'll address that momentarily, one thing at a time. Do you know what the name of the Canaanite pantheon was? The entire Canaanite pantheon had a collective name. That name was Elohim. The second edition Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible from 1999 by Karel van der Toom has a section on the origin of the Hebrew word Eloah, which is the singular form of Elohim. In subsection 2, it reaches beyond Hebrew for an explanation and says, quote, the earliest attestations of both the singular and the plural forms are in Ugaritic, end quote. Keep in mind, Ugaritic is another Semitic language like Hebrew, but it's a dead language now. Then, if you skip down to the end of this page, it adds this. Quote, the term expressing the simple notion of gods is Elim, which never fills the deity slot in an offering list because it occurs only in composite divine names, end quote. So the word gods in Ugaritic was Elim, which was the word they used instead of the individual names of these gods anytime multiple gods from the pantheon were being invoked simultaneously. This is the Ugaritic cognate from which the Hebrew word ostensibly derives. Our ancestors got it from their neighbors, but they had a slightly different understanding of it. They viewed the entire pantheon, all the gods, as just pieces of existence, and Yahweh as the whole. But when you see the name God, that's actually any of several elements and rarely all of them at once. For instance, how did Moshe become the greatest prophet of our ancestral history? The first step was being chosen. Who chose him? Natural selection. That's what she does. She selects, she chooses, she anoints people, she makes decisions. How did she choose Moshe? Exodus 3 verses 2-4. And the angel of the Lord, and Malach Yahweh appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, Elohim called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Did you catch that? When Yahweh was satisfied that she had Moshe's attention, multiple Elohim called out to him from the bush. Elohim is plural, so there are multiple elements inhabiting the bush at that moment. Fire's not just one element. It's an army of elements. What do you call an army? You call it a military force. Fire is one of at least 4 great forces of nature, the armies of existence. That's why you see the term Lord of Hosts about 270 times in the Tanakh. Anything mentioned 270 times in the ancient scrolls is important. How do we know?
It's all in the numbers.
That's Yahweh Shabbaot, meaning existence of armies. Fire is a force in which various elements can deploy. That bush was not burning, but in order for fire to be there, something must be burning. The question is, what forms of matter were burning in and around that bush? Gases, particulate matter. Those things would be the elements who were speaking to Moshe directly. But what we can see is that they're all just mouthpieces for natural selection who never selected the bush to incinerate. The last time that the Great Spirit brought us out of slavery, she ushered in the age of the 12 dragons. We were first led by Moshe. At the start of the age of the 12 dragons, the Great Spirit led us throughout the wilderness for decades. Exodus 13, verse 21, quote, And Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. End quote. We were following a tornado in the daylight and a fiery tornado at night. This invokes the armies of the sacred wind and the sacred fire, both. Do you see what I'm getting at here? I'm trying to show you that the foreigner trained you to think of gods as something larger than life, when in reality most gods are too small to see. That's what makes them the mystery energies of the universe. Oxygen is a god, hydrogen is a god, carbon is a god, and ionic bonds are also gods. Covalent bonds are gods too. This is why Elohim is omnipresent, yet simultaneously invisible. All our ancestral tribes worshipped different entities as the Great Spirit, but all those entities are genuinely different faces of the Great Spirit, the different life forces of the universe. The sun is the life force worshipped by the Cherokee. The sacred wind is the life force worshipped by the Creek. The only problem with this was that Yahweh specifically told us not to worship them. Our worship is supposed to be reserved for her. Don't idolize the parts. Serve only the whole. The reason I talk about the Anishinaabe tribes is because, unlike the rest of us, they stuck to their worship of the Great Spirit rather than the spirits within. What did we read about the Powhatan, though? Their sacrifices went to Oki, not Ahone. Encyclopedia Virginia said it's almost like they ignored Ahone completely. The Creek worshipped Hisakedemesi as the Most High, but he's just one of several life forces, one of many armies. Within him are many more elements, but he alone is not nature. The Cherokee worship the sun as the Great Spirit, which is also not the Most High. When you serve one part, that part will lead you into disharmony with your environment, with other ethnic groups, and with each other. Genesis 7 verses 10 to 11, And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. End quote. This is one of the most infamous acts of judgment that the Great Spirit has ever executed. This was the Great Reset, which initiated the Age of Nimrod after the Age of Sacred Trees. This time, justice was meted out by the army of holy water. One final example. Here's how Big Chief Loved One described Elohim. Remember, he lived in our ancestors' golden age, the age of 12 dragons. 2 Samuel 22 verses 7 to 16, quote, "In my distress I called upon Yahweh, and cried to Elohim, and he did hear my voice out of his temple, and my cry did enter into his ears. Then the earth shook and trembled." There's the first element. The earth shook and trembled. "The foundations of the skies moved and shook, because he was wroth. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils." A smoke out of his nostrils. What? "And fire out of his mouth devoured." There's the second element. And this is not just a dragon. It's the dragon in whose image all dragons are made. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens. He bowed the heavens also, and came down. And darkness was under his feet. Darkness was under his feet. The skies are literally caving in as he, the dragon, descends upon the earth, and the dark matter of outer space pushing into the inner space, making our world, Elohi in Salagi, in the Cherokee language, our Elohi, our world, fold in on itself. It's making the world fold in on itself. "And he rode upon a cherub, and did fly." The dragon of dragons rides a four-winged beast like a chariot. "And he was seen upon the wings of the wind." The wings of the four winds, I keep talking about that, and that's the third element. "And he made darkness pavilions around him." Pavilions are shrines. These are shrines of darkness. Black holes, dark waters, and thick clouds of the skies. Through the brightness before him were coals of fire kindled. Yahweh thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. And he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning, and discomfited them. There's the fourth element. And the channels of the sea appeared. There's the fifth element. The foundations of the world, the foundations of the Elohi in Cherokee language, the foundations of the world were discovered at the rebuking of Yahweh, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. End quote. The dragon of dragons has spoken. Yahweh is existence itself. The sum of all things that exist is called the universe. Whatever doesn't exist is not in our universe, but no one knows what the universe is. What are we inside of? The universe is a dragon, and we are inside that dragon, the belly of the dragon. However, there are also dragons within the dragon because, as I told you, the Great Spirit is an inner power as much as an outer power, a lower power as much as a higher power. Every dragon you've ever heard about in folktales, myths, and fables, or alleged sightings in real life, they are all images inspired by the universe herself. Yahweh is the great dragon against whom all dragons are measured, but that's just imagery. What is she really? Is she physically a dragon? No, she's an operating system. Elohim and Satan are the binary on which the entire programming language of the universe is based. The ones and zeros of existence.
It's all in the numbers.
All in the numbers. So the universe is a great dragon, and all things that exist are inside the great dragon. However, the highest ranking elements all project dragons as their avatars. And believe it or not, That's what God is. How do we know? Because the dragons can be identified not only in our folk tales, but also in nature. And we're going to identify the first one mentioned in the Tanakh. A dragon led the first generation of humanity astray in the age of sacred trees. God is that dragon, and only that dragon. God is not the elements. God is not Elohim. God is only one of them. He shares this rank with Quetzalcoatl and others. Here's how we know. God, in English, is theorized to derive from the Proto-Germanic word gutan, but the etymological trail goes cold there. You'll see Edom Online traces to this same Proto-Germanic word, gutan, quote unquote, which is of uncertain origin. That's because they don't actually know the etymology for this word. So they speculate about a Proto-Indo-European etymology from there. I myself am a linguist, so I'm going to do future presentations on why they choose to trace it that way and what's significant about it. However, I have my own alternative theory on the etymology of this word. The first known use of the word God happens to be in a late biblical manuscript, Codex Argenteus, which is a Gothic translation of the Bible. And just to prove that part before, moving forward,
World History Encyclopedia says, quote, the English word God first came into use through a German term applied in the 6th century Christian Codex Argenteus, gudan, to call, or to invoke, a power.
Uppsala University Library in Sweden says, quote, Codex Argenteus is a unique handwritten book and the main source of what we know about the now extinct Gothic language. The book is considered Sweden's most precious literary treasure and is one of the world's most famous manuscripts. End quote. Okay, so that codex appeared in the 500s CE, when the Byzantine Roman Empire was enduring the Vandalic and Gothic wars. And there was cultural exchange between Romans and Goths, as well as with other Proto-Germanic kingdoms. But that's the same time that the Babylonian Talmud was finished by Persian Yudim, which is the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism. Byzantine Rome had several Jewish communities too, especially in Constantinople and Thessaloniki. The emergence of Rabbinic Judaism rippled throughout pockets of Rome at a time when Goths had been learning Christianity through Roman contact for consecutive centuries leading up to the 500s. So, there's an indirect flow of influence from the Yudim of the Sasanian Empire to the Goths when Codex Argenteus was written. And at that time, there was a pan-Semitic deity whose identity was pervasive throughout all the belief systems of the various ethnic groups of the Sasanian Empire. That deity's name was God. He's always called pan-Semitic, meaning that all Semitic cultures worshipped God at one point or another in classical antiquity. This is actually a deity you can look up on Wikipedia, and you'll see here they call him, quote, the pan-Semitic god of fortune. The pan-Semitic god of fortune, end quote. An article in the Journal of the American Oriental Society by Ryan Thomas, a biblical historian, says the following, quote, furthermore, in connection with the assumption that God arose as a personification, the worship of this deity has often been regarded specifically as a late religio-historical phenomenon corresponding to its occurrence in Isaiah 65 and attestation in Aramaic, Nabatean, Palmyranian, and Sephitic personal names from the 5th century and later. End quote. So from the 400s CE and even after the 400s, Extant recognition of this deity proliferated throughout Semitic cultures, and as that deity got more and more attention in Asia, the Romans formed a pipeline of exposure to specifically Arbitrarily culture into Gothic culture through Christianity, their new religion. Suddenly, Goths create their own translation of the Bible so that they don't have to read in Latin or Greek, but they replace all uses of theos with God. English is in the Germanic language family, so English speakers say God with a variant spelling. Ryan Thomas calls God a personification, which is a common scholarly consensus. He means that God is a personification of the concept of fortune or luck, both good luck and bad luck. Luck is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, guys, like gravity or fission. God is the force who governs what we think of as probability. Fate and destiny are real things. Prophecy is a real thing. These metaphysical phenomena exist because real probability is weighted, meaning that certain outcomes that seem unlikely could count more than most likely ones. Mathematicians will tell you there's no such thing as true randomness, and that's because of God. Luck is the part of natural selection that tilts the scale in favor of one possible outcome over the others. It's called weighted probability. God is the mathematical force of nature within Yahweh who privileged the Negro to be selected as the royal priesthood of humanity. God is the one who governs how a prophecy is fulfilled. Ever notice how Christians pray for specific outcomes and sometimes they get what they want and other times they don't? That's because they're basically playing the lottery with weighted probability when they ask God for things, whether they realize it or not. On one hand, algorithmic information theory defines random as just any sequence we can't compress into a shorter algorithmic description. But on the other hand, this same theory has also demonstrated that how random something appears to be is limited to the observer's computational capacity, which suggests more computing power would actually reveal that what seems random is actually just super complex, but deterministic. In an entirely different discipline, Edward Lorenz applied chaos theory to weather prediction and ended up proving that deterministic systems can yield results that are indistinguishable from randomness. Allow me to simplify my point. Here's a sequence: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. This isn't random because the series is predictable. You know the next number is 12, but what if you're wrong? What if the next number's actually 13? You'd say the pattern is broken, right? The 13 is random, so it makes the whole sequence random. Wrong. It actually just means that the simple pattern you thought was there might actually just be a more complicated pattern. One possible explanation, for example, is that every fifth interval is bigger than the other intervals by 1, in which case the next 6 numbers would be 13, 15, 17, 19, 21, 24. We thought it was random because we were ignorant to what the pattern is, and we were ignorant because the pattern was more complicated than what we're used to looking for. My point is that nothing is ever random. Things that seem random are actually just super complicated, but they're still controlled by a pattern.
It's all in the numbers.
The rare Earth hypothesis suggests the odds of Earth coming together and spawning living organisms was incalculably unlikely. And if that's true, how did this unlikely outcome still happen? That's God's contribution to creation. God did not create man. God did not create the heavens or the earth. God is not Wakantanka. God is not Kichimanito. God did not speak the words of creation. But what God did contribute to creation was a big deal. and that was the probability of all necessary elements navigating together in the right time and place. Hebrew cultures were among the earliest cultures to know about God. Why? Because we're the guardians of the esoteric knowledge of the universe. All forces of nature were identified to us by the Great Spirit herself. So we knew God way before classical antiquity. Why did Ryan Thomas mention Isaiah 65 when talking about God? Because it's the earliest known mention of God. We introduced God to the world. Isaiah 65 verse 11. But ye are they that forsake Yahweh, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop, and that furnish the drink offering unto that number. End quote.
It's all in the numbers.
The English translation deliberately masks his names here. The English words, that troop, are masking the Hebrew name God. And the English words, that number, are masking the name Mani. The Arabic variant of this may actually have influenced the Germanic etymology that produced the modern word many, as in a lot of something. Hence the connotation in Strong's Concordance being number for the name Mani. It says the figurative denotation refers to fate, and the literal denotation is the apportioner. Mind you, to apportion is to divide parts of a whole and allocate the parts to various things, which is fundamental arithmetic. It comes from the Hebrew word manah, which is a basic verb meaning to count. The Nostratic linguistic hypothesis maintains that there's a distant, possibly causal relationship between Proto-Indo-European and Afro-Asiatic language families. And we see evidence of it here because both families have languages that honor a systemic correlation between the M-in consonantal skeleton and the concept of quantitative measurement or apportionment. Like mensura in Latin, menos in Greek, even manya in Sanskrit. This correlation is now linking an English word, which is Germanic, to an Arabic word, which is Afro-Asiatic. The fact that this is consistent across multiple languages in each of these two families suggests that the Nostratic hypothesis might aptly explain how the Hebrew name influenced our modern word many. Mani was the name for God among the peoples of the Arabian Peninsula. Yahweh accuses our shaman of dedicating the table of showbread in the temple to God instead of to Yahweh, and likewise giving our drink offering to God, or Mani. We were redirecting our rituals to her. The publisher of the International Standard Bible says, quote, "Nothing is known of a Babylonian deity named God, but there are Aramaean and Arabic equivalents. The origin may have been a personification of fortune and destiny." There it is again, a personification of fortune and destiny, i.e. equivalent to the fates. The Nabatean inscriptions give, in plural form, the name Mani. Achaemenidian coins, which are Persian, are thought by some to bear the name Mani. End quote. This confirms that Mani and God are one and the same, and the fact that fortune or destiny, better described as probability, fortune or destiny, weighted probability, is a force of nature mentioned by the prophet Yeshaya. And the fact that that is the case, the fact that weighted probability is mentioned by Yeshaya, Isaiah, means that we already knew about God as early as the 6th century BCE. What we just read also says there's no evidence of God being worshipped or acknowledged by Babylonians, which suggests the Yatsarim didn't learn about God from the Chaldeans or the Amorites. Right, because all Semitic cultures got their knowledge of God from us, not the other way around. Chapter 69 in the first book of Enoch also gives us a whole Hebrew folk tradition about God, probably the earliest one there is. Now, I don't actually believe in the validity of the Book of Enoch as a work authored by Enoch specifically before the flood, but I do believe it was written by Are later on, which would at least still mean it represents an authentically Are perspective. Enoch chapter 69, verses 3 to 6. And these are the chiefs of their angels and their names, and their chief ones over hundreds and over 50s and over 10s. The name of the first, Yekon, that is, the one who led astray all the sons of Elohim, and brought them down to the earth, and led them astray through the daughters of men. And the second was named Ashbael. He imparted to the holy ones of Elohim evil counsel, and led them astray so that they defiled their bodies with the daughters of men. And the third was named Gadrael. He it is who showed the children of men all the blows of death, and he led astray Eve, Hawa, and showed the weapons of death to the sons of men, the shield and the coat of mail, and the sword for battle, and all the weapons of death to the children of men. End quote. It's possible that this recalls an otherwise unrecorded tradition of a longer version of the name God from even further back in Yatzarali history, because this harkens back to Bereshith, Genesis. It's a retcon implying that God was the serpent who deceived Hawa to get her to eat from the sacred tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's not that the dragon itself is God, though. The dragon is just an angel of God. What's an angel? An angel is an avatar. In Hebrew, angel is malak, which is usually translated in scripture as either just angel or messenger. But the transliteration is actually someone or something dispatched. The root word is a verb that means to dispatch. To dispatch something is to send it somewhere. An angel is just an image projected or dispatched by the forces of nature. We'll cover that more thoroughly in a future presentation. The dragon who deceived Hawa was just an image projected by the force of probability. Genesis 3, verse 14. And the existence of the elements said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. End quote. We know it's describing a dragon, because it's being forced to slither, as though it didn't already slither. Previously, it flew. The word for serpent here is nachash. Larry Pierce's outline of biblical usage says one option for what it might mean is fleeing serpent, but only in a mythological context, of course. In Middle English, fleeing means flying, and a flying serpent is a dragon, most likely in the Oriental tradition like a Chinese dragon. There's no mention of wings. These kinds of dragons are common in American traditions. Quetzalcoatl is a flying, feathered serpent for a reason. American Indian shamanism knew him as a Chinese dragon. God is the force of probability, and his avatar is the projection of a dragon because our ancestors seem to have traditions of seeing the most powerful forces that drive the expansion of the universe as dragons. We'll talk more in the future in a future installment of the Energy Mysteries series about how avatars work. But the last thing I want to show you is that our ancient shamanism and our recent shamanism were the same.
Quote, character displacement is an evolutionary divergence in resource-exploiting traits such as jaws and beaks that is caused by interspecific competition. It has the potential to explain non-random patterns of co-occurrence and morphological differences between coexisting species. Non-random patterns of co-occurrence. Non-random patterns of co-occurrence.
What did James Mooney call it? Medicine. That's what it is. All of this is pseudoscience. And the shaman is a medicine man. Which scroll do you think we need to go read to find the dragon image as a form of medicine?
It's all in the numbers.
Numbers 21, verses 6 to 9. And natural selection sent fiery serpents among the people. Fiery serpents is Hanachashim Hatzarafim, which is literally fiery dragons or figuratively poisonous serpents. So natural selection sent fiery dragons or poisonous serpents among the people. And they bit the people. And you'd think, oh, they bit people, so they're serpents. Not exactly, because the word for bite there is nashak, which is to strike or to sting. So fiery dragons struck the people, or poisonous serpents bit the people. And much people of Yatarel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahweh and against thee. Pray unto Yahweh that he take away the serpents from us." And Moses prayed for the people. And Yahweh said unto Moses, "Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live." And Moses made a serpent of brass and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. End quote. So Moshe, the great knower, directed the construction of a bronze totem pole with a dragon on it. One of the earliest totem poles in human history. They were healed by laying eyes upon the totem pole because this ritual was a form of ancient medicine. Many others died though. Natural selection chooses who survives. It's not always survival of the fittest. It's survival of the selected. Natural selection is an operating system operated by many forces and elements. Those forces and elements constitute a pantheon known as Elohim in Hebrew, and many American Indian spirits are elements and forces that from that pantheon. In an operating system, the forces would be like the kernel or the hardware abstraction layer. The elements would be things like the file system, the memory manager, the process scheduler, the device drivers.
The trait chosen for one species was in the best interest of all three, not just the one. Why? Because that trait was chosen by an all-encompassing system that governs the whole island.
These are the reasons why all our so-called gods are actually naturally occurring concepts like the Ichiti link between wind and the breath of life, or the Cherokee link between the sun and the primordial soup to generate life on Earth, or the Powhatan duality of creation and destruction, which predates Taoism, even though Taoism later developed with the exact same concept. Some of these elements and forces rank among the highest echelon of the pantheon because they were the first to exist. And those elements and forces represent themselves as dragons to signify that they are the commanders of the armies of existence, Yahweh Shabaot. They do this because the true commander, which is the entire universe, the collective of all of them, is also representing herself as a dragon.
Please be advised, this presentation is not an argument for or against the belief that dragons are real.
Weighted probability is one of those primordial forces, known to our ancestors as God. Physicists universally agree, no pun intended, that the so-called Big Bang is a mathematically inscrutable event of incalculably infinitesimal probability. So the fact that it happened at all suggests that God was one of the first forces to exist, if not the first. The earliest forces are called primordial forces in physics, but in the shamanistic traditions, we identify them as dragon energies. Another example of a dragon energy is gravity, and we'll identify who that is in a future presentation. There are also primordial elements, or dragon particles. Hydrogen is the most important dragon particle in Hebrew tradition, and I'll explain that in a future presentation in this series too. Hydrogen can actually be identified in scripture once you know how to look for him. Dark matter is another dragon particle that we can identify in scripture, as well as in Navajo tradition. In fact, I've already done that one in a previous presentation, but in this series, we're going to analyze it from a different angle. Bottom line, $, God is not who you think he is. Yes, he's very powerful, but not all powerful. God is not the creator. He's just one of several creators. The creators are dragons. And these dragons were known to a specific group of people who have left their mark on both Asia and the Americas. That group was selected by the Great Spirit, Gichimanito, Ahone, Yaiwa. She selected an ethnic group now known as Negroes, originally called Yatzarli. The Great Spirit is the Great Dragon, and the Great Dragon is the operating system for a simulation. Who's running the simulation and why? We'll cover that in a future presentation in this series. The Negro is actually the enforcer of the system parameters for Earth, and every Earth has guardians or enforcers doing the same job we're doing. There are other people, though, entire ethnic groups actually, who have been programmed to run contrary to the parameters of the simulation that this operating system is being used to run. Earth has removed its covering from them, which changes their image. Their pixels have different values, you might say. We refer to them as white people. On human computers, an image is a matrix of pixel values. The operating system of the universe stores images in a similar way, but on a greater scale with more dimensions, meaning more lists of lists for more values to be cross-referenced with one another to encode the image. Not all parts of an image are even visible to us because several dimensions of it are things that only the system can see, such as programming. Genesis 1, verse 26. And Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." End quote. When it says, after our likeness, after means according to, so according to our likeness. What is our likeness in Hebrew? Kidmuthnu. Likeness is just demuth. Now, of course, the denotation given for this word by Strong's Concordance is just resemblance or model. But the root word from which demuth derives is a verb, dama, which is to like. But it's not to like something or someone. It's to like in the sense of intending something. Look at how this same word is used in other passages. Numbers 33:56 used it to say, "I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them." And the word thought is dama. I'll do to you as I'd like to do to them, or as I'd intend to do to them. This is a common use for this word. So when it uses the same word to say one thing is like another, the connotation is that the first thing is made with the same intention that the other was made with. Therefore, Elohim said, quote, "Let us make man in our image according to our intention." They're talking about programming. When computer programmers write lines of code for a website or a video game or a mobile app, whatever the case may be, they're writing their intentions for what each pixel on the screen will display to you. The subscribe button on this watch page takes up roughly 4,000 square pixels. Each pixel has a value that corresponds with a color, but all 4,000 of them are programmed with the same intention, which is to form this button. The button has a function, and when you click on it, all the pixels react to convert as intended to make it look like the button was pushed. Like and subscribe while you're at it. The likeness of Elohim is about system programming. All things on Earth mirror the things of the universe as a whole. That's why we call it outer space. It's mostly just space, but there are random pockets of concentrated activity. Those are galaxies. Zoom in on one, and a galaxy is full of empty space too, but it has pockets of concentrated activity. Those are called solar systems. Zoom in on a solar system, and once again, you find mostly open space. However, each planet represents a pocket of concentrated activity. If you zoom in on our planet, you find a lot of sparsely populated land, but human activity is concentrated in densely populated pockets called cities. But now, by now, you get the picture. As above, so below. As within, so without. This all stems from an ancient Hebrew philosophy that I call Tuotaism, which phonetically stems from the Diné language of the Navajo and the Igbo language, Diné and Igbo. I'll break that down in a future presentation when we talk about what the real law of attraction is. My point is that this is how image works. Elohim made humans in their image. So at our scale, the only thing with their likeness, their programming, is human beings. We're programmed to exercise dominion over all things here. But dominion, it doesn't mean dominance. It doesn't mean ruling with an iron fist. It means caring for everything the way parents care for their children. We're supposed to be parenting the wolf, the salmon, the dragonfly, the rose, the hawk. We're their parents, and we must take care of them and raise them to thrive upon the earth. The ethnic groups programmed to challenge the code, to challenge the law of nature, they've been leading humanity for the past millennium. They were stripped of their earth covering to remove their natural affinity for terrestrial environments. So of course, they're allergic to the sun, they're the vector groups for more than half of the most impactful human diseases, things like that. But ever since those people took on leadership, they've been leading humanity to do all the things that run contrary to the law of nature. We rape the land by sowing diverse seeds together and never giving the land rest. The law of nature calls for sabbatical years wherein we let the land grow wild without cultivation every 7th year. What's the consequence? Global food shortage crisis. We mingle livestock of diverse kinds when the law of nature calls for them to be housed separately. What's the consequence? SARS, the most recent iteration of which was COVID-19. We encourage men to explore sexual relations with other men. What's the consequence? STIs like gonorrhea are rapidly adapting to antibiotics, making them harder to cure, and bisexual men bring these infections back to straight women who also infect straight men, which means fidelity in marriage will soon be the only defense left to us. This echoes 2 commandments of the law of nature: men not sleeping with men, and no one sleeping with anyone but their spouses. I could go on and on about the unnatural practices we've been led to accept under the leadership of the uncovered heathen. Yatzarel was supposed to lead humanity to keep the law of nature, and pretty soon we will return to do our job again. Why? Because we're the guardians of the code. It's all about the code. It's always been about the code. And it will always be about the code of law. It's all in the code. It's all in the numbers.
Chuck, I've been public on the fact that I'm waiting for someone to convince me that we don't live in a simulation.
I've heard you say it.
The arguments put forth have been quite convincing to me. And most of the best arguments are traceable to a guy named Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at the University of Oxford.
Okay.
Here's the argument. Ready?
Go ahead.
Our computing power is growing rapidly.
Right.
We create simulations of worlds. We have video games with characters that are inside the video game.
Right.
Imagine a day where you can simulate a world so perfectly with life forms, humans, so well that you can recreate every single neurosynaptic thought you could have, but now you're in the simulation on the computer.
So,
including the perception of free will.
Well, there you have it. Because then, so now you would have enough computing power to imbue the Sims inside of the program with all of the human traits that we possess now.
Correct. Not only our human traits, but the world.
But the world.
The world itself.
Right.
And you don't have to have all the world existing there at all times.
Right.
That might be an unrealistic amount of computing power.
Right.
You just need
enough of the world that they see around them.
That they see around them.